Great. Thank you so much, everyone. This is Jonathan Eisler. Hopefully, you all can hear me. I'm excited to be one of the representatives for the California team today. Apologies for missing yesterday. I had a conflict that unfortunately I couldn't miss, but I'm very excited to be here. And of course, I've really enjoyed the entire 3-year partnership with the other states, the other projects, learned so much from you all. So I just wanted to preface all of this with saying that this has just been an extremely valuable experience for me personally, for the California Department of Education, and of course for our whole research team. So I just wanted to mention that. We have multiple members of our team. Varsha, Piper, and myself will be doing the presentation, but we have others on the line as well, including Julian Betts and New Gao. So we're happy to field questions afterwards, but really excited to be here and to talk with you all about our research partnership. So really today our focus is just kind of summing up some of our major findings from how school districts supported learning recovery during and after COVID. So next slide, please. So today what we're going to talk about, of course, is a summary of our work, kind of the main findings of what we've learned. We're going to discuss a little bit about what we're thinking about doing, planning for the future, and then also mentioning some of the connections that we've made with the field in the course of doing this work. Next slide, please. So this is our amazing team. So I'm not going to name every single person here, but I will say it is an interdisciplinary team. It is a multi-organizational team led by New Gao at AIR and her colleagues, but we also have folks from UC San Diego, UC Berkeley, California Department of Education, as well as members of the Public Policy Institute of California, or PPIC. So again, this is a big group of people that have been involved at one point or another or along the whole way during our 3-year project. So next slide, please. Okay, so what are we looking at? And really you can kind of look at 3 main categories. So the first part is just actually capturing what are the actual learning recovery programs that have been implemented across California since the outbreak of the pandemic in spring of 2020. So what are they? What's actually going on at the district level and kind of across the state? How are districts making budgetary and program decisions about how they've been responding to the pandemic and about learning recovery? So kind of capturing the district decisions, both in the budget space and the program space. And then looking specifically at the association between these programs and student outcomes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the original findings, and then I'll pass it to Varsha, and then Piper will kind of finish off with some of the summary. So next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of looking at a survey of all of the information that's publicly available, different documents throughout California, we have many, many districts, right? We have probably more districts than I think any other state. We were able to capture information from 727 districts across the state. This represents 72% of all the districts. And you can see that it covers almost all of the K-12 student population. Over 90% of the students in our public K-12 schools are part of these 72% of districts. So while we didn't get a completely comprehensive gathering of information, we feel that it's very representative of the state as a whole. So really there's 3 kind of major buckets or major categories that we found in terms of districts looking at different types of programs in terms of recovery. And this is where a lot of the kind of stimulus money went. So the biggest bucket, as you can see towards the top, is extending the actual learning time that are available to students. Staffing is kind of the second most popular category, and then actual specific learning support. So within that extending learning time, not surprisingly, I think this probably happened in a lot of other states, almost 80%, 78% of districts reported that they extended or added summer programming to their adding time to the interaction between instructors and students. 2/3 extended the school day, and a little bit over half added tutoring with qualified staff. So that's kind of like the expanding learning time portion. Almost the same percentage of districts also added staffing or used resources towards staffing. So 61% hired additional instructional supports, 60% added staff training with an academic focus. You had almost that same percentage with the socio-emotional learning focus. And then slightly lower than that at 40%, you had hiring that was specifically aimed at staff looking at SEL supports. And then at the more kind of organizational level, in terms of learning supports, you had just under half of districts that actually put resources towards supplemental or new instructional materials. And then slightly less than that, you can all see the percentages, increasing use of technology, increasing counseling, using the direct district staff members to do counseling services. And then we also had the multi-tier system of support, which is essentially within California, you have the state supporting counties, county supporting districts, et cetera. So specifically aiming resources towards those types of programs. Next slide, please. So what have we found? So we found that policies matter, right? Policies absolutely matter, both at the state level and at the district level. So let's kind of drill down into a couple different ways of how we saw that happening. So we did find that in 2022, per pupil ESSER spending and reopening districts earlier, so reopening to in-person instruction, did lead to better test scores in the spring of 2022 on our standardized assessments. We also found in 23 that per pupil ESSER spending did lead to better recovery in the spring of 23, although that was not necessarily a statistically significant finding. And overall, we found that there was not necessarily a clear link between district programmings in spring of 23 with outcomes, with a couple exceptions, with a couple really important exceptions. So one exception was in cases where districts extended instructional time, there was a 0.9% reduction, 0.9 reduction in percentage of days absent at the district level. And we also found, the higher the teacher retention rates within the district, there's a 1.5 reduction in percent of days absent as well. So if you're looking at the outcome as chronic absence, we did find some pretty impressive findings related specifically to extending the instructional day, as well as efforts that were made to retain quality teachers. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are districts doing to kind of set priorities and how are they innovating? So, really we can look at it kind of at the more macro level in terms of overall pathways towards recovery. So not surprisingly, and again, I'm sure this is happening in all of the states, really one of the things that has been a priority has been focusing on budget stability, right? So the question is, how are the stimulus dollars used to be able to help budget stability at the district level? So one of the things we found from talking to many of the different district leaders and just from gathering public resources, public documents, is how could they do this in such a way that they're not going to then be able to put at risk kind of these long-term costs that would be unaffordable or unsustainable. Another part of that is how could they add programs or expand supports on the edge of school organizations. So being able to kind of innovate in terms of new types of programs. Again, thinking about sustainability. Can they do this in a long-term basis? And again, not surprisingly, and I'm sure this was mentioned quite a bit yesterday, the Illinois team mentioned this as well, really kind of prioritize and uplift student socio-emotional well-being. So those were really themes that we saw over and over again, looking at district strategies. In terms of innovations, again, we don't have nearly enough time here to talk about all the really cool things that we found, but here's a couple that we found. So, for instance, a lot of different districts added a seventh period, added additional school periods, switched to block scheduling, created outdoor classroom spaces. For the most part, the weather in California is pretty great. You can have outdoor a lot of the year, not to brag, right? And also just kind of focusing on social emotional learning specifically and explicitly. So we found lots of innovations around that. And then also, and again, this is probably not unique to California either. Two of my kids were actually in high school during the first year of COVID. So I saw this kind of personally on hand. I got to see them kind of go through it. Flipped classrooms, right? So different kind of pedagogical innovations. Tutoring, right? Embedding tutoring within the actual school setting, and also kind of creating school periods or class time periods for advisory opportunities. So these are all kind of innovations that we had captured as well. Next slide. So I think that's to Varsha, correct?
Yes, I'll go ahead and take it from here. Thank you, Jonathan. So all of these incredible findings led us to make some big picture learnings, lessons learned that sort of informed some of the recommendations and the larger takeaways that we had. One of the most important insights was sort of this need to break down silos between research, policy, and practice, especially during times of crisis like a global pandemic. We found that researchers, policymakers, and practitioners may define these problems differently, especially during a time of crisis when these definitions are subject to a lot of change. For example, while much of the academic and policy discourse emphasizes academic outcomes, particularly test scores, local leaders are overwhelmingly prioritizing student mental health and social emotional well-being. Another common disconnect arises from how interventions are implemented and evaluated. Research typically studies one intervention at a time, but local decision makers are rarely relying on a singular intervention. Instead, they're implementing a suite of programs addressing multiple facets of student learning. And this sort of led us to the conclusion that in order to make this research more actionable and this policy more effective, we need to establish a shared understanding amongst all these stakeholders and partners, or even create a common language to discuss these different types of issues. Next slide, please. And that leads us to sort of the key elements of research practice partnerships and how to grow our expertise in these effective partnerships. That requires all of these different elements, right? So conducting rigorous research, developing deep connections with state policymakers, also developing strong relationships with school districts, and using multifaceted communications to sort of inform policy and practice. So, with these learnings in mind, we wanted to create a couple different recommendations for each of the different levels that we interfaced with and sort of talked about and investigated throughout our research. Next slide, please. And so that starts with sort of recommendations for our most macro level or for states. So, in the case of major disruptions to education, we recommend anticipating, slow recovery and funding accordingly. So we found in our research that while large inflows of funds to school districts were certainly helpful, spreading funding over even more than 4 or 5 years could provide the extended help that students might need. This could also encourage districts to bring reforms in-house, and by bringing reforms in-house to a greater extent, we can allow for better alignment between reforms and supports and the existing types of teaching approaches and curriculum that already exist within these districts. Second, we recommend sort of investing where centralized action has the greatest impact. Statewide investments are more cost effective and comprehensive to bridge the digital divide than district by district approaches. And we saw this because early in the pandemic, California was able to purchase and distribute devices, Wi-Fi hotspots to students and families in need. And then later on, the state invested over $6 billion to build out broadband infrastructure. And this sort of approach to centralized action allowed for a better bridging across that digital divide than each district trying to find solutions and using their own funds sort of indiscriminately of what was happening at the larger state level. And finally, even though this may seem intuitive, we're also recommending sort of avoiding confusion from similarly named programs, especially when they're dealing with different rules and eligibility criteria. For example, in 2021, the state launched the Expanded Learning Opportunities Grant, or ELOG, as well as the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, or ELOP. And those are both sort of providing additional resources to address pandemic disruptions, but don't have the same rules and eligibility criteria, right? So this can create confusion for districts that are trying to allocate their funds effectively, and can also, provide some miscommunication between the state and the different partners that are interfacing with these ideas. I'll go ahead and pass it along to Piper to walk us through some of the other levels of recommendations.
Thank you, Varsha. In terms of what recommendations we provide to LEAs, the first big one is about modernizing data systems. So, what we've seen is that having access to timely, actionable data can really make a difference in districts' recoveries. So, for example, districts having data on like which students are chronically absent and also being able to link attendance data with assessment data can really give districts a better understanding of the impact of the pandemic and also make them better equipped to be able to address and respond to the impact of the pandemic. And in terms of how districts can figure out what data they should be collecting, we think it'd be really valuable to have local leaders collaborate with researchers to really gain an understanding of what types of data are most useful and for what types of evaluations. And that will really help to make sure that data collection efforts are purposeful and aligned with the LEA's improvement goals. And our other recommendation for LEAs is to use multiple measures of student learning. This has been talked about a lot today, obviously with the references to SEL hubs, but districts, often rely on quantitative data like test scores, attendance, and graduation to guide their local improvement efforts. And we've seen throughout the course of this partnership a big shift to kind of focusing on more the whole child or the whole student development. And that oftentimes will include incorporating more qualitative evidence, like looking at data on the student voice and experience collected through means like surveys, apps, podcasts, youth advisory panels, and that gives us a more holistic understanding of student experiences. So we're seeing a shift from just looking at the quantitative evidence like test scores and attendance to really taking in the whole student and their overall well-being. Next slide, please. And then in terms of our recommendations for researchers, the first thing is we recommend co-designing research with policymakers and practitioners, and really involving policymakers and practitioners as essential partners in designing research is going to help ensure that research is speaking directly to the needs of these individuals. And it's also going to increase the likelihood that the findings will actually be used in the real world. So that's going to be really important for, again, making sure research is useful, context relevant, and will actually be implemented and applied in real life. We also found it valuable in our partnership to experiment with new ways of sharing findings. So in terms of how we communicated our research findings with decision makers, we found it really effective to use diverse methods like informal debriefings, workshops, listening tours. And we found that these diverse methods of sharing findings really helped to foster dialogue, engagement, and also help local leaders consider how research might apply to their unique context. And finally, we think it's valuable for researchers to be rethinking how to measure the impact of educational research. One big thing we've taken away from the pandemic is that we really need to think a lot about how research is conducted and used, especially as it seems like future crises and shutdowns are unfortunately inevitable. We've seen a lot of this happening already with weather-related shutdowns, like what we saw in LA with the wildfires. And so it's really important for research to be embedded in the realities of policy and practice to make sure that it's relevant and timely and impactful. And so this might look like developing common language, co-creating research design, and fostering mutual learning. And this can help, make sure that we're reimagining research and practice and ultimately making sure that it's more responsive to the complex needs of students. Next slide, please. So in terms of our connections with the field, California is the most diverse state, and our findings seem to generalize particularly well to other states, but particularly those in the Western regions and New England. And just kind of pulling back and thinking of broader implications for policymakers, we think it's, obviously important to be reflecting on and thinking about how we can better prepare for future disruptions and how we can leverage or continue leveraging research practice partnerships to further advance educational equity. And similarly for practitioners, it's, we want to look a lot more at how our innovations emerging and persisting through the pandemic and beyond, as well as how we can lift up and support academic recovery and student well-being. Next slide. So there's been a ton of amazing products to come from this research practice partnership. I think I saw a link dropped in the chat to our recent infographic that was created in collaboration with a lot of the amazing folks at AAR. So feel free to check that out. But this is just listing some of the different products we've put out from our partnership, including in-depth research reports, policy briefs. We've also held a number of events bringing together local and state decision makers, legislators. And so if you look at these 2 QR codes, you're welcome to scan it with your phone. We can also share the links out, but the top QR code will take you to the event page for our upcoming convening in November in Sacramento. And then the bottom link will take you to our project webpage where you can see a little bit more about our team and some of the different products that we've put out there. So take a moment to scan if you haven't already. We'd love to see you all at our convening in November if any of you are local or want to come in to visit with us. But other than that, I think we can move on to the last slide, please. So, we would love to collaborate and continue leveraging our research practice partnership to advance educational equity. Based on all of this research that we've done, we have made really deep connections with key state policymakers, as well as we've built really strong relationships with county offices of education and school districts across the state. So these are really valuable opportunities to continue conducting this research using these valuable connections that we've made over the years. So with that, I just want to thank you all so much for your time and open it up for questions.